Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to this real talk post-film discussion of the documentary film Blue Box by Michal Weitz as part of the 2022 Hartford Jewish Film Festival. My name is Avinoam Pad. I'm the director of the Center for Judaic Studies at the University of Connecticut and a film festival advisor for this year's Hartford Jewish Film Festival. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, Professor Jeremy Pressman, who is also going to be able to share some insights with us on this film. We are hopeful that Professor Yechiam Weitz will also get connected. For those of you who have seen the film, Yechiam Weitz is the uncle of the filmmaker Michal Weitz and the grandson of the head of the Jewish National Fund, Yosef Weitz, who is the focus of the film itself, and is also interviewed extensively in the film and has many insights as an expert on the history of Israel and Palestine and the Zionist movement to share with the film. So we are hopeful that he does get connected here to the Zoom, but for the time being, we're having some connection issues from Israel. So what we'd like to do, and I don't know if everyone has seen the film. I believe that the film is still open and available. Yes, Jennifer is part of the streaming option through the film festival. So what we'd like to do is share a couple of clips from the film, the trailer, and a couple of selected clips from the film, and then we'll open it up for insights from Professor Pressman. I'll share some of my own thoughts on the film, and then we'd love to open it up for Q&A and discussion from the audience. You'll notice that for now, you've been muted just to minimize disruptions and background noises. We'll have a chance to unmute as we go on, or you can type questions or thoughts that you want to raise into the chat feature of the film, of the Zoom meeting. So let's start with the trailer itself, for those who have not actually seen the movie, so that you can get a sense for what is covered in the film. So one second. So I'll share the trailer and then I'll share a couple of excerpts from the film.
Dr. Weitz of Keren Kayemet, a pioneer of Israel. The forest is his dream and passion.
אני גדלתי על המיתוס של סבא יוסף. אבי היערות, אבי ההתיישבות. זה היה רק כמה שנים לאחר מכן, כשגיליתי שלסבא שלי יש עוד כינוי. אבי הטרנספר. היומן של סבא. קראת?
כמעט ולא.
לא.
2 ימים עסקתי בפינוי האדמה והוצאת הערבים משם. כאשר החל המחנה לעזוב את האדמה, התעורר בקרבי כל המוסר וצבח ממעמקים.
לא נוח לי שקוראים לסבא שלי אבי הטרנספר, ולא נוח לי שאת עושה את זה.
חוכמה קטנה מאוד לשפוט את זה כשאת נמצאת במקום אחר.
The land of Israel was acquired by the Jewish people. The blue box was devised as a symbol and as a fundraising vehicle.
הדור שלנו כל הזמן מנסה לחפור במה שקרה בעבר ולא נותנים.
מיכל יקירתי, אין לי תשובה.
You can see here, this is the trailer for the film itself, which situates the film both in the context of Michal being the great-granddaughter of Yosef Weitz, but also the intergenerational components of what are the stories that the family told to each other about their great-grandfather Yosef Weitz, who was known as the father of forestation in Israel, very much responsible for the work of the Jewish National Fund and planting forests all over Israel. The title of the film, The Blue Box, comes from those blue boxes that were used to raise funds for forestation. But as we see in the film, we're also introduced to another side of the history, which is both the question of the demographic question of Israel and Palestine creating a Jewish majority state, and decisions that were taken by the Israeli political leadership of the newly created state in the context of the war in 1948 to essentially seize an opportunity with the flight of Palestinian refugees to not allow them to return and to plant forests over that land, which is where the term the father of transfer comes to, that they refer to the grandfather. So the film itself, I would really encourage you to watch. It's quite compelling, thought-provoking. It raises a great number of questions. There's a great deal of history that's provided here. I'm going to skip ahead in terms of what I share to one part of the film where Michal talks to her uncles, to her father, about what they knew about sort of their what their grandfather's role was. And so I'll just share this, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy to share some of his insights and reactions to the film.
הכפרים נקברו מתחת לעצים, ואיתם נקבר הסיפור שלהם. תטעו אותו מתחת למעטה הירוק, וסיפרו לנו על החייאת השממה, ולי על סבא, אבי היערות.
מה שהיה מדובר בבית זה היה ייעור. הקמת יערות, משתלות, חקלאות.
נוסעת בקריית יערים ואת רואה את היער, את יודעת שסבא נטע אותו במו ידיו, את יודעת שאת יער יתיר הוא יזם. יער ביריה הוא יזם.
אני בבית בקושי שמעתי את המילה הזאת, טרנספר, בקושי שמעתי את המילה על גירוש ערבים, בכלל לא שמעתי. יכול להיות שזה לא עלה, כי זה מורשת מאוד נפיצה.
תראי, יש לי כאילו מצד אחד, אני גם היסטוריון, שעסקתי במשפחה בכלים כהיסטוריון, אבל מצד שני, הדברים שהם דברים לא קלים.
מה לא קל?
לדעתי, יש משהו של בושה, אפילו במילה טרנספר. למשל, במאמר הזה שמצאתי את זה, אני יכול לתת לך, זה הנכדו של מר טרנספר. כאילו זה הפן הלא נעים.
מה זאת אומרת?
לא נעים, כאילו זה לא נושא נעים מבחינתי.
אז איך בכל זאת אתה חושב שהתמודדת עם הנושא הזה של הטרנספר?
מיכל יקירתי, אין לי תשובה.
הם לא משתחררים ממה שלימדו אותם בילדות, הם נחזים בגאווה שקשורה אליו. לא קיים טרנספר, לא קיים גירוש ערבים, לא קיים פינוי קרקעות, הוא לא גרם סבל לאחר, כאילו, מבחינתם.
גדלו על איזשהו מיתוס כל כך משמעותי, אז לשבור את זה בטח כבר בשלבים שבהם הם נמצאים בחיים, זה קשה. יכול להיות שאתה מתרחק רגשית יותר, היכולת שלך לייצר פרספקטיבה ואמירה היא אחרת.
ומה שהיה הכי מעניין זה שהקונפרונטציה עם אבא שלי. באתי ואמרתי לו, תגיד, סבא שלך היה אחד מאבות רעיון הטרנספר, הוא ישב בוועדת הטרנספר, בן גוריון בעצם שלח אותו כדי לנקות את הארץ מהערבים, כדי יהיה פה לא רוב יהודי, רק רוב יהודי, אלא שיהיו רק יהודים. אבא שלי שהוא איש אמת בכל רמ"ח איבריו, בן אדם שלצערי לא חסך ממני כל מיני אמיתות אחרות במהלך החיים שלי, דווקא במקום הזה הוא שם איזה מין בד שחור.
במשפחה לא סיפרו לנו על זה.
לא נוח לי עם כל הסיפור הזה, לא נוח לי שקוראים לסבא שלי אבי הטרנספר, ולא נוח לי שאת עושה את זה.
יכול להיות שזה משהו שלא מדברים עליו במשפחה.
מה זה אומר?
במהלך המלחמה, מרבית האוכלוסייה הפלסטינית שהייתה בארץ ברחה וגורשה, ומה שהיישוב היהודי עשה, וסבא היה מאוד מעורב בזה, מניעת שיבה והריסת כפרים.
את יודעת מה נדמה לי? שאם את היית ב-48-9, היית עומדת יד ביד עם כל אלה שעשו whatever יקרת לי עכשיו, חוכמה קטנה מאוד לשפוט את זה כשאת נמצאת במקום אחר.
מותר לי לשאול שאלות, מותר לי להעביר ביקורת, אני חושבת, ואני חושבת שגם מותר לי לבקש מבני המשפחה שלי להסביר לי. הדור שלנו כל הזמן מנסה לחפור במה שקרה בעבר ולא נותנים לו.
מיכל יקירתי, אני לא מעוניין להשתתף.
Okay, I will stop it. I will stop it there. I think that gives you a little bit of a flavor for some of the components of what is raised in the film. I'll just also note that a central component of her research is going through her great-grandfather's diaries, which is sort of an important historical research component. So it's not just sort of the stories that were told within the family, but also taking the diaries that were basically left on the shelf, presumably in the family home, and digging into trying to understand what their great-grandfather did, you know, what his job was and what the implications of that and what he thought about it. So gives you a little bit of a flavor for those of you who have not seen the film. For those of you who had, I'm sure there are many questions you want to ask and raise for discussion. But before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jeremy Pressman, who's in the Department of Political Science at the University of Connecticut, Director of Middle East Studies, and an expert on the Israel-Palestine peace process, for some insights, thoughts, reactions to this film. Thanks, Jeremy. Oh, sorry.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you. Can you hear me now, okay?
Yes.
So let me first apologize. My neighbor decided this was a good time to have a company take down a tree next door. So if you hear some of that going on in the background, I apologize. Well, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Avi, for the invitation. And thank you also for bringing this film to my attention, because I think it's really fascinating. I think many of us who've seen the film would probably like to be at their next family dinner after. I mean, I guess the film already came out a while, but it would have been interesting to be at some of the family events to see, because that, and especially that last scene we just watched between father and daughter, quite an intense discussion, something I think many of us can relate to on a range of issues sometimes in our family. So let me just say a few, different kinds of thoughts about the film, and hopefully some of these will latch on to things you're thinking about. I thought it was a gorgeous film in the sense of, I thought that the archival material, the footage that she had of her grandfather, of her great-grandfather, and of the things going on around mandatory Palestine and then Israel was just really incredible footage. And I'd love to even just watch it again, just for the richness of the visuals of the film. I probably could have done without a few of the shots of the archives, but each filmmaker makes their choices. But there are some choices here. There's no Palestinian voices in this movie about 1948. She makes the choice to focus on family interpretations of what happened, not to bring in really outside experts from outside the family. I'm not criticizing those choices, but I think they're worth noting. I mean, I think we should give filmmakers some leeway in terms of how they want to tell the story. But I also want to note about the film, before moving on to some of the substance, that it also reminds me in a little bit of a book from just about 15 years ago by Sandy Tolan called The Lemon Tree. In the sense that Tolan is talking about a much broader sweep of Israeli-Palestinian history, but he also, the story, it's a nonfiction story, but it gets so much leverage from drawing on the family. And he's kind of going back and forth in that book between the families that were involved in what he's describing and the national narrative. And I just thought that was a really rich aspect of this film here too. We're getting an understanding of what's happening in mandatory Palestine, how the Yishuv is functioning, and then the state of Israel and early 1948 and the early years. But we're also getting a sense of the national, of the personal narrative of what's going on in the family and what their role is in this. So I like that as the way the film was done. I think this film, moving on to substance, I think this film nicely captures sort of three schools of thought that I'll oversimplify about what happened in 1948. And I think the battle is really going to be between two of these schools of thought. I think one is the mythology that Israel, I'm just using that term loosely, we could get into exactly what I mean by that, but has used, which is we didn't do it in 1948. It wasn't our fault. But I think what we're actually moving is away from that point and towards a different kind of debate between two positions. And I think you see these two positions as her family is struggling over this. One position is we did it, but we had to do it. It was necessary for the foundation of the state and the functioning of a Jewish state. And by it, I mean the Nakba, the expulsion of Palestinians. And the other position is we did it and it's morally wrong and we need to have a reckoning with that. And I think you can see the struggle, for instance, in that scene that Avi showed there, that showed several of the family members wrestling with this question of whether it was necessity, whether it was part of the foundation of the state to be able to function as a viable Jewish state going forward, as opposed to Michal, the filmmaker, who I think takes a different position. The third point that I wanted to make was that I think the film does a nice job of reminding us that we often focus on one aspect of 1948 and not as much the second piece that I'll emphasize. And I think the filmmaker does a nice job of bringing both to the fore. We often talk about how the Palestinians came to be refugees, and that's a very important question. We don't tend to focus as much, I think, on what Israeli policy was post-1948 and the Israeli decision not to allow Palestinian refugees to return. And, one thing, I guess, to the extent that I disagree, I don't know if I would say disagree, but to the extent that I guess I look at something differently is when Rami Weitz in that clip we saw kind of implies, and elsewhere it's implied in the film, that, who are you to judge what happened in 1948 with the standards of 2020 or 2021? What's interesting to me is actually, at that time, there was contention about whether this was legitimate, right? In December 1948, the UN passes Resolution 194 and takes the position that Palestinian refugees do have a right to return. In 1951, obviously just 2 or 3 years after all these events happen, the UN passes the Refugee Convention that sets the parameters for post-war treatment of refugees. And so, no, there actually was at that time a debate about what the legal, political, moral ways of dealing with refugees were. It's not just, I think, imposing back from this time. Let me just say, I think another thing that comes out in this film a lot that had me thinking, and I often talk to my students about when we're talking about state building in general, and also 1948 in particular, and thereafter, which I guess I'd summarize as the question of erasure, like an eraser. And in the film, the focus is on the erasure of Palestinian villages by destroying some of them. But there's other kinds of erasure that took place too, right? The changing of street names, the changing of place names. And so it's a really, I don't have a lot of insight on it, but just a fascinating thing to think about to me, about how competing national projects and competing peoples, how naming and place are so important to that, and renaming and re-identifying, therefore, and redefining is so important to that. And I think we see a reflection of that in the film. And then just one last point, Avi, if that's okay. So the film was called Blue Box, as we know. And I guess I was kind of expecting much more of the film to be about, and you can choose your word, I guess each word is loaded in certain ways. What's your connection to the land of Israel through the blue box? Or maybe you might say, what's one's complicity with what the Jewish National Fund was involved in as a result of connections to the box? The film doesn't really focus on that much. The blue box appears occasionally, there are images, but that's not the focus as much. And so I think it opens the door to another film about how people who participated, including myself in that, think about the role that the JNF played. Because the film starts to talk about, and others have talked about it before this, a very different role than the presentation, much as Michal Weitz struggles with the presentation of her great-grandfather as, you know, the father of the trees and forestation and the father of transfer. I think there's probably a struggle about what the JNF was and what that all meant in terms of contributions to the state and its founding. So I'll stop there, and thanks again, Avi, for the opportunity.
Yeah, and thank you, Jeremy, for those insights, and also thank you for jumping in sort of here at the last minute. I can't tell, Sarah, if Yechiam has managed to join, perhaps with the link that I sent with my name. I don't know if he's trying to.
I think he's in here. I'm going to ask him to unmute, as I think that might help.
Okay. Hopefully that will work. So, you know, one of the interesting things, Jeremy, in terms of thinking about this film is that it's very much a film that I think helps us sort of distinguish between history and memory. And there are different ways in which we talk about history, right? So there is the sort of practice of writing history. There is the history that gets recorded. There is the history that is told and written in the textbooks. And then one of the interesting things about the film, which tries to do both, is it both tries to sort of tell a story, right? Sort of provide kind of a historical perspective on the great-grandfather Yosef Weitz and his role with the Jewish National Fund and sort of the Zionist movement's policy vis-a-vis the Palestinian Arabs, the significance of forestation, some of the role, as we see here in the discussion of the war in 1948 and the creation of the refugee problem and the issue of transfer. But then there's also this sort of very personal component of family history, which raises the question of, you know, sort of, and we saw it in the clip that we watched, right? Why did no one ever tell me this, right? Which gets to be very personal, especially in the way that this film is presented. And so there is this sort of, and that might fall in the sort of family memory, collective memory. What were the stories that were told about Saba Yosef instead of sort of the history that was written? And I think one of the interesting dynamics that's at play here that reflects sort of this intergenerational conflict that's playing out in the film is the ways in which it's partly about sort of what did Yosef Weitz do, and what were the decisions that were taken, and it gives us a lot of insight in terms of Israeli, the Zionist movement and Israeli government policy. But then it's also very much sort of this generational conflict that is separate from the history, sort of these questions like, why didn't you tell me this, right? Which is, I think, maybe difficult to reconcile in the way that it plays out in Israel's history. I wonder, Jeremy, and I asked you, and I guess I don't know if, I'm not sure if it's Yechiam who's in here. I would love for him to be able to unmute and get connected, but I'm not sure if he's able to unmute. But in the meantime, Jeremy, one of the questions that I asked you when we were sort of corresponding about this before was, the movie does an interesting thing where it sort of fast forward to the present day. And I think there is an implication that if sort of by knowing this history, it might be able to play a role in, let's call it, reconciliation and peace building efforts. And I want to hear your thoughts on sort of what those possibilities might be, or what role sort of coming to terms with history might provide for peace building efforts. Oh, I have to, okay, sorry, yeah. So it's a great question, Avi, and I only have sort of more questions for you, not answers. I mean, as people may know, I think you said at the beginning, although I envy historians, I come as a political scientist to this discussion.
And I think, political science in terms of conflict resolution and reconciliation has been split on this question. Sometimes you have the argument that without reckoning with the past, you can't chart a real pathway towards the future, right? So that we have that we, whoever we is in whatever particular case, this case or other cases of conflict, we have to grapple with our worst demons. And only in doing so can we then open up the space for moving forward. And I think sometimes, like if we think about like truth and reconciliation commissions, partly that's the role that they're playing. They're trying to unpack the past so that the present, the possibility of cooperation and conciliation particularly on this conflict, I've read people writing that if we get bogged down in the history, right, we're never going to move forward. We're never going to resolve those kinds of differences. And therefore, it's only by looking forward and considering, and then maybe decades after we move forward, then we can start to unpack some of that very difficult history. And just circling back to what you said, Avi, I think the film does a nice job of laying out some of the different positions on the national history without saying in my view anyway, without saying necessarily which one is right. I mean, the filmmaker kind of makes her position known, but I don't think she gives voice to other positions as well. But on the family dimension, we're a little bit stymied, right? The full discussion doesn't unfold before us, and maybe that speaks, and maybe we'll hear more in a minute, maybe that speaks just how difficult sometimes family issues are. Not that national issues are easy, but certainly family issues can be quite difficult.
Right. It looks to me like Yechiam, can you hear us?
I want to speak about my...
No, so let me just welcome Yechiam.
It was my grandfather. We live the same place in Bet HaKerem in Jerusalem, in the place that now I live. I'm the third generation in the same place in Bet HaKerem in Jerusalem. I know him very well. He died when I was a student in the university, in the Hebrew University in 42, when I was 22, and we speak about a lot about the question of the Arabs or the future of the state of Israel. And I remember him after the 6 days war, and we speak about the question of the state, and he was against the territory. He was against. He thinks that many Arabs is the disaster of the society of Israel. And I was also now I'm a dove. I take the way of the sea of my grandfather till now. I don't, we were there, then I didn't remember to speak about the transfer, but he was very, very old. And the main points that he speak about the future of the state. and he was against against Gush Etzion. He was against in the first time after the war. He was a close friend of Levi Eshkol, who was the prime minister, and Eshkol asked him what to do about the Gush Etzion, and he was against. He, in the time of the mandate, he was the establishment of the Gush, but after the war, he was against. Now it's another state. And I remember very well about his view about the future of the territory after the war. After the war.
So, Yechiam, I want to first of all welcome you, but I also want to properly introduce you to the rest of the people in the meeting. So I'll just
Of course, I saw see the movie about my grandparents, and also I was in the movie. If you saw you saw me in the movie, but I didn't speak in the movie about the some person, a connection of me and my grandparents. No, I can't speak about it.
Yeah, would you mind telling us a little bit more about sort of your relationship to Saba Yosef and the parts that are not? Yeah.
What?
Would you mind telling us a little bit more about your relationship to Saba Yosef and the parts of the film that's not in the film?
He was a very, very warm Saba word. In the Shabbat, I wanted to their home. We live in the same home in the first place, and in the Shabbat we going to the Saba and Savta to eat in the breakfast. He was very warm, Saba, and he was very you must be writer. And now I'm is there the wish of my Saba to be writer and a historian, and while about 6 or 7, you must be what you have to writer. Writer.
So, if you can hear me, Yechiam, I'm curious when you see the film, and you see sort of
I see the movie 3 times.
Yeah. So how do you respond to the next generation, the critique of the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren of Saba Yosef? What's your response?
Michal Weitz didn't know him. He was another in the 3 generation. He didn't know him. But I think the movie is a honor. Yes. Yes, and we can see the Saba in the movie in in a very honor.
Do you think so? In the film Michal, it seems like she wants to expose a family secret.
I didn't hear you.
It seems that Michal wants to expose a family secret. Do you see it that way, or is it? Do you interpret it a different way?
You want it for this, you know, we think about the war in 48. It's another condition, and not a section. No. We know it. We didn't speak about it all the time, but we know it. You know the diary of my Saba. It's only in Hebrew, and I know the diary. I can go in 1 minute to show what is the 1 minute. I come to take the books of the diary to show you what is this, but it's take minutes.
Okay, we'll keep talking while you go to get the diary. That gives me a chance to invite people to type questions into the chat that you'd like to make sure we address in our discussion and in our conversation. And I'll say that one of the interesting components in this sort of intergenerational dialogue that takes place is what is framed as secrets and what is framed as stories that are not told and what is framed as history that's not written.
It's only in Hebrew. This is the diary. I can see, for example, you can see here, you can see it. You can see.
We see a couple of pictures. Yeah. It's a little blurry, but yeah.
This is Saba and Levi Eshkol and Rabin, that was the chief of the staff of the Tzahal in 66. You can show it?
Can you hold it? Can you hold it back a little bit?
Show it?
Yes, right there. We can.
No.
It's a little blurry, but.
No. I know very well the diary. I read a lot of it and use it a lot when there's many articles about him that I deal with, and of course that I use it, and it's only in Hebrew. You can see there's many photos.
So Yechiam,
yes,
you are one of the leading experts on the history of the Yeshua.
You know, the only one in the family that writes something about him, it's me. The only one, not Michal, and then the other that were in the movie. The only one that writes something about my Saba, it's me.
And would you say that he
also write about my father, Professor Yechiam Weitz, that was that deal with the settlement of Israel many years. He was a very known man, personally.
So before you joined the meeting, we were starting to talk about whether learning this history can help with the future peace process.
You asked me?
Yeah.
Against.
You think it's a negative?
What?
Would it help? Does learning this history, can it potentially help in leading to a future peaceful agreement
about
between
Israel now?
Yeah.
What? I don't know. You know, I am a member of the party Haaretz of the left of the doves. As my view, I take for my Saba. Take from Saba.
יחיעם, אתה מעדיף שאני אשאל את השאלות בעברית ואז נתרגם אותם?
לא.
לא צריך? אוקיי.
אני פשוט לא שומע.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure would it be easier to ask the question in Hebrew or not, but it's more about the sound. So let me, I want to ask some questions that have now started to come into to the chat, if that's okay. People are typing in questions, so I want to make sure. I think one of the questions that's implied in the film, and Jeremy, you might want to weigh in on this also. One of the questions that's implied in the film is that the blue box of the Keren Kayemet, it implicates diaspora Jewry, American Jews, in the process that's detailed in the film. And, you know, I don't know if this is, I think this is very much intentional, right? To say, see, those of you who put, you know, in the blue box, you are also implicated in this. אין בעיה. מה ששאלתי עם הקופסה הכחולה, יש בסרט, אני לא יודע אם זה בדיוק רמז, אבל בסרט אנחנו רואים את הרעיון שיהודי אמריקה שתורמים לקרן קיימת, אז הם גם, יש להם חלק בכל התהליך ההיסטורי גם כן. אתה שומע?
You know, I didn't know, I don't realize about the topic, no.
Yeah.
About Jewry in America, I didn't know. I didn't deal about it.
Yeah. Jeremy, do you have
the Jews in America?
Do you have thoughts on that?
Israel, but I don't. I saw it in the in my film, but there's no question. You know, the clear question.
Yeah. Jeremy, what do you think about this component of the film, sort of what it says perhaps about the role of American Jews or diaspora Jewry, that sort of Jews in the diaspora who contribute to the Zionist movement also have some responsibility for the actions of the Jewish state?
No. I sorry, there was no, I don't any question to the any תשובה לזה.
Okay, so I'm going to ask, sorry, Jeremy, I'm allowing you to
Answer
unmute.
about
I'll ask Professor Pressman, who's here with us too, to share his thoughts.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
So Avi, I think it's an important question, and as you say, the title of the movie and the appearance in the movie of people putting money in the blue box does raise that question. If I could, I would embed it in a larger issue, which is that mainstream American Jewry and much of the Jewish establishment is very willing to let Israel, the government of Israel, take the lead. Maybe that's the right decision, maybe it's not. In doing so, yeah, I think there's levels of responsibility for what mainstream American Jewry is then connected to, is contributing to, etc. Right? It reminds me a little bit, for instance, the past US ambassador to Israel, Ambassador David Friedman, prior to being ambassador, contributed to certain causes in the settlements in Israel, right? So his contributions are connected to that project. Obviously, he did it because he thought it was a worthy project. So going back to your specific question, yes, I think there are levels of responsibility when we contribute to something. It would be interesting to know, certainly. I mean, I don't want to just kind of, give a broad brush to it. It would be very interesting to know what people thought they were contributing to at that time, right? We know what oftentimes the campaigns look like and the brochures, and that's not necessarily what's going on the ground. So I don't want to say everyone knew every detail that we're seeing in 2022, but I think, yes, I think it's as important for us to explore what our connections are to projects and where our funds go as it is to hold the people responsible, or at least ask about responsibility of the people who are executing the immediate plan.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is definitely the implication in the film. Yechiam, if you can unmute, I have a question that I want to ask you as well. Yechiam, lo shomim otcha. You have to unmute. Okay, the question, Yechiam, in the movie, which you've now seen 3 times, you said, your niece has certain excerpts from the diary that she includes. You are one of the few people who've read the whole diary. So what is not included in the diary of your grandfather that perhaps we miss in the film and the selections that we see about what he writes about in the diary, who he is?
Yeah. The basis of the movie is this. This is the basis. It's I remember that he come in the 4 or 5 in the morning, come and write in the diary about 40 years, and the basis of the movie is this.
So,
and he write very, very, very nice. He very, very I remember him. He comes very, very early in the morning and come and write in the diary, in the pen, כמובן, not in lap.
Yeah. So what does he write in the diary that we do not see in the film? Meaning, what do we miss? What do we miss about him?
This is one volume. There are 6. It's about 5. There's many ways. there's 6 volumes. This is the deluxe. So you can't to make from a diary to a movie. You can't.
Avi, if I could just add, I think Rhonda's point in the chat, I think is an interesting thought, right? That there's a lot of material, and so it would be a written evaluation of the diary or multiple written evaluations of the diary would allow for much sort of broader exploration, right? A movie doesn't lend itself to 3,000 quotations from the diary. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but a written scholarly project certainly would lend itself to that kind of analysis of broader themes and consistency or not across, as Yechiam points out, 40 years of writing about the situation.
So ideally, we'll have a publication that is the published diaries of Yosef Weitz with footnotes.
He make it was in the life. This one is the last. It was after he died. But the 5 he make when he was in the life. It's his project.
Yeah. Yechiam, do you think that he had a sense of the historical value of his diary when he was writing it?
Many years, men use the diary. It's many very important diary. It's not like the here, for example, here. You notice what is this here? This is because I use it. This is the diary of Moshe Sharet. Of course, Moshe Sharet was very important because a prime minister and many years minister of Haaretz, affair of
the foreign minister.
But the diary of Saba is very important. Many people use it. Yes, many scholars use it.
Yechiam, there in the diaries of David Ben Gurion, a lot of the critics say he knew
what
when it comes
I use the diary of Ben Gurion a lot. Now it's in the internet. You can use it a lot. Of course, the diary of Ben Gurion is most important. In the books in the 2 years in the war, 48 and 9. Of course, the Ben Gurion is the most people important, and the diary of Ben Gurion is the most important. You can't something that in the level of Ben Gurion and the diary of Ben Gurion.
There is, and this question is both for Jeremy and for Yechiam. Part of the implication in the movie or the response to Michal.
I can't hear.
Okay, אתה שומע?
בקושי.
בקושי, okay. Is that...
זה רחוק.
זה רחוק. אני אגיד בעברית ואז אני אתרגם לאנגלית.
I now in בית הכרם, Jerusalem.
Yeah. סך רחוק.
You know, in the place that was of my Saba.
In his house.
Yes, not the house of the first, but he was the first generation in Bet Kerem. I'm the three. And I live the only one in the family that live in the place of Saba Vesafta. I'm the only one, and the wife.
So I want to say, and I want to invite, if people have questions, to type them in. There is a sense in the film that we cannot judge the actions of 1948 and 49
we can't.
From the perspective of 2022.
Another point. It was about 3 or 4 years after the Holocaust, and we must find place of the people from Europe after Holocaust. For example, the man that did about it was my father. יחד עם with Levi Eshkol, both deal with a settlement in בסוכנות היהודית. But you know, my Saba didn't wrote in a diary about Holocaust, מעט מאוד, peace. But the feeling was, now we after the Holocaust, and we must find place of the Jews in Europe. And it is the point of the judgment.
I mean, I might come at it from another direction. Oh, sorry, please.
A little about the Holocaust, but
go ahead, Jeremy. Go ahead, Professor Pressman.
Yeah, I might come at it from another angle too, which is, if we go back to November 1947, the Yishuv accepted the idea of the UN Partition Plan. And the UN Partition Plan, had it been agreed upon by the Arab side, it wasn't, but had it been, the population in the state would have been a very narrow Jewish majority. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, 55 or something % of the state would have been Jewish residents.
No, there is a terror in Tel Aviv.
There's a, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
New, just now.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
It was a telephone my daughter.
Oh, a terrorist attack in Tel Aviv. Jeremy, do you want to finish that?
Sorry, yeah, just that the Zionist leadership made the decision that a state that was...
אני בקושי שומע אותך, אף אחד.
That a state that was just slightly a Jewish majority would be acceptable, or at a bare minimum, as a way to act as a refuge. One of the arguments connected to the Holocaust, but also more broadly connected to anti-Semitism. So it seems to me that that should suggest to us that there were a range of possibilities of how a Jewish entity or Jewish state could look, and what kind of there was no deterministic endpoint that it had to be for the demographics of that state, not in terms of my view, in terms of the decisions that the Yishuv was making in 1947, 1948. And obviously that changed during the war, right? And the population changes, but the initial decision, I think, opens up other possibilities.
Yeah, no, I think that context is really, really important, but also, it even comes up in the film. I can't remember which uncle says, but sort of the war happens in 1948-49, and there is a historic opportunity that presents itself, and decision makers took decisions which we're still living with the implications of today.
Yeah.
So I just want to give one last chance if anyone has any further questions to type them in the chat. If not, I will we'll start to wrap up the conversation.
My son live in Tel Aviv, as I must to know what to him.
Yeah.
He live in Tel Aviv. Now there's a new terror in Tel Aviv. I saw it, in the internet all the time.
So Yechiam, thank you for being here today. You go ahead and call and check with your son.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He's not about 50, 47. He's not a little son. He's journalist in the Haaretz. Very important, really. Okay.
What's his name?
Gidi Weitz.
Gidi Weitz. Okay.
His same
name
in Israel. Know who is? You are the father of Gidi Weitz.
Well, I'm happy that you were able to join us today. Toda Yechiam. Toda Rabba. Chag Kasher v'Sameach. I want to thank everyone who was able to join us today. Thank you for being here and joining us for this program. And if you have not seen the film, please watch it, and we'll have more to discuss. Jennifer, do you want to say something about the remainder of the Hartford Jewish Film Festival?
Sure. The film festival goes on until Sunday, or at least the last virtual film and the last physical film are, the last physical film's on Sunday, the last virtual starts on Sunday. We have Hester Street at 1 o'clock and Wunderkinder at 3 o'clock at the Mandel JCC. Tickets are on sale at hjff.org and are available at the door. And we have a variety of films available online. Most of them are running through the 10th through Sunday. And if you would like to watch any, we encourage you to buy a ticket. And if there's something you missed and you really, really would like to see it, please email me. My email address is on the HJFF website. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you to Jeremy Pressman for jumping in to join the discussion. And thank you all for your attention and participation.
Sure.
Be
Thank
well.
you, Ab.
Thank you.